Jaco's plot finally gets rolling and the Dragon Ball lore dumps are creeping around the corner. It's part 2 of Jaco the Galactic Patrolman, and this is Dragon Ball Dissection. Gaiden. Now that Jaco, Omori, and Tights have eluded the authorities, for now, Tights has up and decided she wants to live with them, and as an offering she has bought them a small amount of sky gold. It's not enough to power the ship for interstellar travel, but it is enough to get it off the ground and activate the radio to call for help. Unfortunately, Jaco doesn't remove the ship from under Omori's garage before he takes it for a test ride, and he damages the antenna. After all that, his situation has not changed. There's been a background event running through the story I haven't mentioned. A famous idol, Azuki An, is going into space on a rocket as a publicity stunt. What a wacky world Dragon Ball takes place in, as if that would ever happen in real life. Omori thinks it's stupid, Jaco can't get An's song out of his head. With the introduction of Tights, that story thread finally comes to the forefront. Toriyama does something a bit unexpected with Tights. They aren't exactly jokes, but he does play against certain expectations, only to lean directly into other expectations. It's almost like he's trolling the audience, but in a very subtle way. As I continue to say, given all the evidence a 2013 audience would have had while Jaco was in serialization, I'd argue it's almost impossible to not have figured out Tights' lineage. If the name wasn't enough, the story throws out another hint. When Omori questions whether Tights can drive a boat to go get them food, she asserts that she can even pilot her dad's ship. Omori wonders if that cryptic statement means her dad's a fisherman. It's practically screaming at you that you should know who her dad is. Then, when she returns with ludicrously expensive sky gold, that also seems like it should be the same kind of hint. Oh, what family is always effortlessly throwing around large amounts of money to solve every problem? But it turns out that actually isn't where she got the money. If you somehow hadn't connected this to Dragon Ball or thought all of those clues were red herrings, it's pretty logical to assume the story is building to Tights actually being Azuki An under an alias, hiding out on a remote island for the lulz. In fact, when Tights starts asking how to get to the island where the launch is happening, Omori even assumes that's the case. But that's not true either. Tights is actually Azuki An's body double, hired to go up in the rocket just in case everybody dies. Well, geez, that's pathetic. Even Katy Perry was actually in the rocket. Well, supposedly. But Tights actually used her body double salary to pay for the sky gold, not her heretofore unrevealed family wealth. See what I mean? Every time you think you have this character pegged, and to be honest, we totally do, there's still something that comes along to throw a bit of a wrench into it. Again, it's not funny exactly, it's just rather cheeky. If anything, in retrospect, Tights' behavior here serves to set her apart from her family. Sure, I could argue that Tights being so rich, she can throw around money without thinking too much about its value. But I do think it's telling that rather than running home to daddy, she gives up the money she earned herself, doing her own thing. And even the job itself is a means to an end. She wants to be a schlocky science fiction writer, so getting to go into space is an invaluable experience. She just wants to write and live on a dinky island with a weird old man and an alien. When Tights eventually does reveal to whom she's related, she insists she didn't want anybody to know because she doesn't want to be treated special. And while her sister can be adventurous, Bluma is often the character Toriyama uses for devolving into histrionics whenever she lands in any real danger or inconvenience. Tights shrugs off the possibility of dying on a dud rocket simply because it's something she wants to do. She's completely unflappable. Alien? Got it. Die in a rocket? Whatever. I'm 2 days late for my job? Yeah, well, your boobs are tiny. Get over it. I like Tights a lot, and looking back 12 years later, I really wish Dragon Ball Super had given her more to do. The Azuki An setup is not the only other shoe that drops. The news releases an artist sketch of Mask Man, and frankly, it's the funniest visual gag in the entire series. I'll take a series where this is the actual main character. While Jaco remains horribly offended at Earth's interpretation of him, Katayude recognizes Mask Man as the figure he saw at Omori's island and rounds up a posse to apprehend him. Jaco is all too happy to confront Katayude directly, if only to seek out his help to update the sketch. However, the confrontation is going to have to wait as Jaco's super elite eyesight notices that Tights' rocket, the Twinkle 8, is malfunctioning and it's going to crash into the capital. Well, apparently it won't wait, as Katayude isn't about to let a little thing like that get in the way of his collar. So Jaco beats up all of them in a single panel. No, really, Katayude literally laments that Jaco beat them all in a single panel. Here I am a little disappointed, not because of the story itself, but because of the interstitials between chapters in the collected release. Toriyama used that space to create character profiles for everybody, which is neat. But since there are so few major characters, the book shares info on most of these government warriors far before we ever meet them. That they have absolutely no role in the story makes all that build-up quite a letdown. But it sure is worth it knowing that this guy is super into kite flying. Jaco realizes the only way he and Omori can get to the rocket in time is if they use Omori's not exactly a time machine. They hurry off to that spot in the woods and fire it up. Time indeed slows down for the two boys and they run off to the spaceship, which they then fly over to the rocket. Okay, I know this is a comedy series, so I probably shouldn't be thinking too deeply about this, but this is the climax the story has been building towards, and it's played completely straight. I don't think this makes any sense, and I have to devote a large portion of my time to explain why. Maybe you already see the problem, but if not, here it is. How would flying the spaceship save them any time at all if time is slowed down? Let me dig into this. Jaco and Omori go into the device, which presumably keeps them from being affected by the change in time, so they can move really fast relative to the rest of the world. This is demonstrated by Jaco taking a moment to examine an insect in flight, which to his perception is no longer moving. So as far as I see it, if Jaco and Omori get in the spaceship, they might be super fast, but the spaceship is only going to move as fast as the rest of the world is moving. It would appear to be moving painfully slow to them and would arrive at its destination in the same amount of time if they had used it normally. In fact, it's slower than if they had done that because they already wasted time traveling to the time machine and starting it up. This shouldn't work, but it does. And it's not as if the series is making a joke about its gag manga logic or making a joke at the expense of the characters who completely fail to think through the logistics of their plan. It just straight up works. And that bothers me. On top of that, just like with the henchmen, this is a huge letdown. And this time I can blame it on the story because the story has set up this time manipulating device only to pay it off with a situation that isn't really a time manipulation problem. By the time they reach the rocket, time is moving normally again anyway. You could pretty easily cut out those panels of them going to the thingy, and the story would just as easily read as Jaco flying a ship and getting there right in the nick of time. The tiny bit of sky gold saved the day. When you can remove the plot device the climax centers around without being able to tell that it's removed, it's a weak resolution. And it's really sad to realize that after all of Omori's dedication to building this thing, the only payoff it's ever going to get is this participation trophy of an action scene. Yay, you helped, I guess. If it was up to me, I'd have them stop time the literal moment before the rocket collides with the city. That way, it's visually obvious that this is a scenario that can only be solved through time manipulation. Then have Jaco use his own flight ability to transport himself and Omori to the crash site. Either save it until now, or don't have him say he can use it only once, whatever that means. Then you can have a real The Flash type scenario of Omori getting the crew to safety while Jaco dismantles the rocket piece by piece as it slowly, very slowly micrometers towards the pavement or something. All that said, I like its application as it pertains to Omori's character arc. Omori wants to find a way to change the past, to bring back his wife and the other dead workers. What he needs to do is look to the present and save the found family he has made and the humanity he keeps claiming to hate. I like that. Even so, I wonder if I'm giving it too much credit. I think that would play more strongly if, like Jaco's flight ability, this was something Omori could use only once. Then he'd actually have to make a choice. Here, the concept just kind of stops, as if it only existed to get to the Twinkle 8. We're only told at the end that he's still working on time travel. Anyway, while I was saying all of that, Jaco rescued the occupants and blew up the capsule, thereby saving the city. Jaco is a hero! Katayude mistakenly believes that Jaco is a super advanced robot made by Omori. He's become disillusioned with the government after realizing they didn't intend to put an actual idol into space, and he decides to let Omori stay on the island. And most importantly, he agrees to get the sketch of Jaco updated. Unfortunately for Jaco, the updated sketch is even less accurate. But that's okay, because Jaco takes his new friends out to see the Earth from space. Well, it's okay for his friends. Jaco is fuming that all Earthlings must die. That, my friends, brings us to Chapter +1, otherwise known as the Crammin' All the Dragon Ball Stuff chapter. It opens with a cute gag. Tights is swimming just off the island, and Omori warns her about the Umibozu sea monster that will try to lick her butt. While that never actually happens, you can see an intensely gazing creature drifting ever closer in several panels. The time has come for the evil space alien to arrive, and for Jaco to carry out his mission. Naturally, this is when everything gets completely fouled up. Tights climbs the cliff Jaco is spying from. While they're waiting, she comments on his cool bodysuit. He reveals that he's actually naked. She asks where he pees from. A little squirt comes out of Jaco's head, which lands on Tights' face. She freaks out and pushes him off the cliff, and it's at this exact moment that Goku's space pod careens through the sky, thus ensuring the events of Dragon Ball will happen. I love it. Continuing on, Tights finally brings her family into the story when she suggests Omori could reverse engineer the anti-gravity components of Jaco's ship to earn enough money for the Sky Gold. Omori is skeptical, though. He doesn't have the expertise, and as such, he'd inevitably give away that this is alien technology. And he can't just sell the rights because he wouldn't be able to trust the company he sold it to. That's when Tights recommends Capsule Corporation and her father, Dr. Brief. It'd be really funny if it turned out that Tights wasn't nearly as limelight shy as she let on, and that this whole thing was a scheme to poach alien technology for her dad's company. It's not, though, and the whole family comes to visit, including a 5-year-old gun-toting Bluma. While everyone else gets down to the pleasantries, Bluma puts her already considerable genius to work by single-handedly fixing Jaco's radio. It turns out that when he crashed into Omori's garage, the end of the antenna broke off. She finds the piece and pops it back on. And yes, Toriyama has been consistently drawing it like that ever since the accident. Not only that, she figures out the entire ship problem. Omori was wrong. Sky Gold is not the fuel source for the ship. It's basically just a capacitor, and a cheap metal like copper would work just as well. It's basically the Namu doesn't have to buy water resolution. Anyway, Dr. Brief buys the anti-gravity technology, which, after converting from Zenny to Yen, gives Omori enough money to buy the island for himself. Everyone lives happily ever after. Jaco goes back to his job, but not before heading to the TV studio so that everybody finally knows what he actually looks like. He starts dating an identical girlfriend. Tights continues to live on the island and becomes a successful author. Well, except for her book Jaco the Space Policeman. That one didn't sell well. Even Katayude moves to the island, becoming a great cook and housekeeper. And then one day, several years later, the now teenaged Bluma stops by the island to let them know she's on a quest to find some weird wish-granting orbs. I wonder whatever became of that. Alright, so let's take a look at this from the Dragon Ball Nitpicker's perspective, as Chapter Plus One gives us a lot of material to work with. First off, Jaco gives his friends a lot of gratuitous information about the Saiyans. Most of it is stuff we already know either from the original story or from 2009's Super Exciting Guide. In particular though, Jaco says that Saiyans have long childhoods so that they can deceive others until they grow into their adult bodies that are more suitable for fighting. This bit of exposition has always kind of made me roll my eyes. Like, it's not anything that ruins Dragon Ball, it just seems like a rationalization to solve a problem that never really existed. Goku spends the first few years of Dragon Ball looking like a shrimp, despite the fact that he's supposed to be in his early to mid-adolescence. Later on, Gohan seems to grow a lot faster. Is it not enough to accept that Toriyama's art style simply changed over time and that he stopped drawing kids as stubby little gremlins? No, just like Goku wanting to eat all the time, this has to tie into Saiyan biology. I always say that it sure is lucky for Toriyama that he decided to have Kuririn grow into a very short man. That way, it just so happens to retroactively fit that Kuririn as a kid could also happen to have Saiyan proportions. I would have loved it if, say, Yamcha had been Goku's contemporary, so that Toriyama would have had to scramble to come up with an in-universe reason as to why he had been unnaturally short as a teenager, only to sprout up into a tall adult. He was malnourished growing up in the desert. It was only after he moved to Capsule Corporation and started eating well that he finally reached his growth potential. On top of that, the rationalization for the biology quirk doesn't even fit into its own story. Saiyans look like helpless children in order to ingratiate themselves to the societies that take them in and unwittingly raise them into adult conquerors? Then why is Goku said to be dangerously violent right out of the box? Why does it take brain damage to turn him into a docile child? Not only is that part of Goku's backstory from Dragon Ball, it's reiterated in Jaco 2 pages after this exposition is given. Gohan says that Goku would have been a threat if anybody but a skilled martial artist had found him. Wow, what a stealthy infiltration, baby! Next, of course, is Goku shown arriving on Earth as a toddler and wearing armor. It's a far cry from what had then been traditionally accepted as naked baby Goku. This one doesn't really bother me. Most of those depictions come from outside of the Dragon Ball manga, like this scene in the Dragon Ball Z anime or the Bardock special. Were those depictions most likely inspired by this remembrance of Raditz from the manga? Probably. Can we assume Raditz is thinking about how he remembers Goku, instead of how he looked at the moment of his departure for or arrival on Earth? Sure. Was that what Toriyama was trying to convey at the time, though? Probably not. Does this potential contradiction really affect anything in the manga? No, not really. More troublesome is Goku's relative age. See, in Jaco, Bluma is stated to be 5 years old. Goku is supposed to be 4 years younger than her. This doesn't look like a 1-year-old. But, maybe Saiyans also grow really fast up until the point that they start growing really slow. Or maybe it's just artistic license. If I can accept that this is a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old, why can't I accept that this is a 1-year-old? But it seems more likely to me that Toriyama remembered or checked that he had originally written Goku and Bluma to be 2 years apart, but forgot that he had changed that in the next story arc. Then, in an attempt to show that Tights is also smart, there's a bit of dialogue where she has to remind her dad that she already graduated university at 16. Then in the epilogue, when Bluma is now 16, Omori's narration states that she has likewise already finished college. And yeah, this is just incorrect. Not only does Bluma tell Goku that she's taking on her Dragon Ball quest during her summer vacation, in the Red Ribbon Army arc she tells him that she skipped school because it was boring. something the accompanying police officer disapproves of. You'd have to bend over backwards to excuse this, say she's going for a doctorate she also just never finished, or that she was teaching school and ditched her students. And no, I'm not making those excuses. This is a big ol' stupid ol' plot hole. Omori's narration also states that Bluma shared with them her speculation that the Dragon Balls come from outer space, because they're made of a substance that doesn't exist on Earth, and I just don't like that. It's annoying enough to me that all of the mystical elements of Dragon Ball's Earth are gradually rewritten into alien shenanigans, but at least let that be a surprise to the characters. Finally, as I talked about in the previous installment, this chapter tries to add context to the Dragon World's history. Zenny makes a comeback, confirming that while the East uses yen, the West uses zenny. Dr. Brief's acquisition of hover technology is clearly meant to explain the existence of such vehicles in Dragon Ball. What I was hinting at last time is that such a huge technological boost centered in one part of the world could be used to explain just how Western-dominated the series seems to become, where we never hear of yen, and where characters don't have family names. Then again, that Western domination could be the result of something a bit more sinister. After all, Nappa wipes out the Eastern metropolis in the Saiyan arc, and that's a catastrophe that's never undone with the Dragon Balls. So it could just be that there is no more Eastern civilization. Or people. Well, that's a fun note on which to end the story of Jaco. As long as we're here, though, let's take a look at Dragon Ball Minus. Yes, I know I already did a video on that, and while my anger has subsided, my opinions on it have not changed. However, that video largely looked at it as a standalone story as opposed to being a part of Jaco, and as a part of Jaco, it still sucks. In fact, reading it directly after Plus One highlights its issues all the more. I know I just got done ragging on several elements from Plus One that attempt to tie it to Dragon Ball, and yes, a lot of that smearing of pointless trivia bogs the chapter down. But those bits aren't the main point of the chapter. It's still telling a story, it still features fun characters, fun jokes, narrative progression. Dragon Ball Minus is a photographic negative of that. It's all stats and trivia and references with the barest of threadbare characterization and story progression. And remember, this is tying in with Battle of Gods, so Frieza has to make a reference to Super Saiyan God. That has to be part of the backstory now. Super Saiyan God has to be the reason Frieza wipes out the Saiyans. I'm surprised he didn't mention Beerus too. Ugh, it all just feels so cynical. Obviously, Minus exists to help bring in the Dragon Ball fans. Would I have read Jaco back in 2014 if it hadn't been tied to Dragon Ball? Probably not. I certainly never read Sachie-chan Gu and Gia before I had to make these Jaco videos. But yeah, as Dragon Ball bait, it at least fulfills a function, even if it performs that job pretty badly. But in this thought experiment, taken solely as a prequel to Jaco, because I've already talked about it in its context as a Dragon Ball story, it might be even worse. None of these characters or plot points have anything to do with Jaco. Goku coming to Earth is ultimately an incidental part of Jaco's story. It's simply what sets the adventure in motion and is ultimately never resolved. Who cares what the alien toddler's dumb space parents think, especially when they're this underdeveloped? The only payoff this gives to the Jaco story is in its final 2 pages, where it's revealed that the Galactic Patrol doesn't care all that much about Earth and is only assigning Jaco because he sucks. That actually is funny, and accomplishes what a prequel should, reframing the story to see things in a new light. And from that perspective, I will actually give this credit as a prequel to Jaco. Conditionally. I could potentially accept the argument that revealing the supposed alien invader is actually a refugee whose parents sent him to Earth to seek asylum completely turns Jaco's motivation on its head. His mission is wholly wrong. Not just because the story of Dragon Ball is at stake, but because it would be morally repugnant to harm an innocent refugee. I really like that story. But here's where that condition comes in. Jaco the Galactic Patrolman doesn't tell that story. See, revealing that Jaco is considered a screw-up even in his own world works because the character has spent the whole story puffing himself up to everybody around him. Jaco never confronts Goku, he never meets Goku, he never has to make a decision about Goku. This would be like finding out the old lady who gives Jaco money actually made that money through an illegal drug deal. I mean, technically it would change the context of that part of the story, but to what end? Would we really be interested in reading a dozen pages establishing something so far off the point? I really want to find some avenue to praise this over, but the only actual value Goku's new sympathetic backstory has is in how it recontextualizes the story of Dragon Ball, and, well, I already made a video regarding how I feel about that. Whew, did I go deeper into that than I ever expected to? That's all I can say about Jaco other than to wrap up. I'll be honest, because that's what I always aim to be with all of you. This is not quite as good as I remember. That's not to say it's bad by any means. It's a lot of fun. It's as I described it last time. It's cozy. It's cozy, it's charming, it puts a warm smile on my face. A few of its problems stand out to me a bit more than the last time I read this, but they aren't enough to make me dislike it. Toriyama stated this would probably be his last solo manga, and he ended up being right about that. If this is, in a sense, a goodbye to his work, I don't mind that it's this. Thank you for your hard work, Toriyama-sensei. However, we're not saying goodbye to Jaco the Galactic Patrolman because the corporate synergy train keeps a-chuggin'. Just as Jaco had to reference the most recent Dragon Ball movie, the next Dragon Ball movie had to include Jaco. Next time we spend one final outing with the Dragon Ball Z branding with Resurrection F. I've used it as a punchline in my videos many times, but I haven't seen it since it was in theaters 10 years ago. Is it possible I might change my tune? Honestly, I'm as curious to find out as you probably are. Thanks so much for watching. I'm sorry this video was late, but that's because Donkey Kong Dissection took me far more time than I expected it to, and it pushed everything back. Please give it a watch if you haven't already. It's about Donkey Kong Country Returns, and it's by far the biggest video I've made all year. I'll see you next time!